Hey, this is Zachlog the Great, and I am here today with Chris
Hello.
and Nate,
Good day.
and we are doing something just a little bit different today. We are going to be doing a group reading of the just fantastically written story, "The Eye of Argon" by Jim Theis. I don't know.
Fine.
You may Thighs, Jim Thighs. Um, and there's actually an old game that goes along with this at science fiction at old science fiction conventions, where people would try to read as much as they could. They'd get a group of people together with a paper copy, and they would try to read as far as they could without bursting out in laughter. And when that happens, they would hand it off to the next person. So we are going to record our own version of that game today. And if you're not previously familiar with this story, go ahead, look it up on your own. We are going to do our best to give a full-throated and faithful interpretation. So,
And believe me, it takes a lot of throat.
okay, so having said that, I guess we're ready. Anything else before we get rolling, guys? Okay.
No, I've girded myself for the challenge.
Okay. So, The Eye of Argon by Jim Theis. The weather-beaten trail wound ahead into the dust-racked climes of the barren land which dominates large portions of the Norogolian Empire. Age-worn hoofprints smothered by the sifting sands of time shone dully against the dust-splattered crust of earth. The tireless sun cast its parching rays of incandescence from overhead, halfway through its daily revolution. Small rodents scampered about, occupying themselves in the daily accomplishments of their dismal lives. Dust sprayed over three heaving mounts in blinding clouds while they bore the burdensome cargoes of their struggling overseers. Prepare to embrace your creators in the Stygian haunts of hell, barbarian, gasped the first soldier. Only after you have kissed the fleeting stead of death, wretch, returned Griner. A sweeping blade of flashing steel riveted from the massive barbarian's hide enameled shield as his rippling right arm thrust forth, sending a steel-shod blade to the hilt into the soldier's vital organs. The disemboweled mercenary crumpled from his saddle and sank to the clouded sward, sprinkling the parched dust with crimson droplets of escaping life fluid. The enthused...
Okay. The enthused barbarian swiveled about, his shock of fiery red hair tossing robustly in the humid air currents as he faced the attack of the defeated soldier's fellow in arms. "Damn you, barbarian!" shrieked the soldier as he observed his comrade in death. A gleaming scimitar smote a heavy blow against the renegade's spiked helmet, bringing a heavy cloud over the accordion's misting brain. Shaking off the effects of the pounding blow to his head, Grenner brought down his scarlet-streaked edge against the soldier's crudely forged hauberk, clanging harmlessly to the left side of his opponent. The soldier's stead whinnied as he directed the horse back from the driving blade of the barbarian. Grenner leashed his mount forward as the hoarsely piercing battle cry of his wilderness-bred race resounded from his grinding lungs. A twirling blade bounced harmlessly from the mighty thief's buckler as his rolling right arm cleft upward, sending a foot of blinding steel ripping through the Cimmerian's exposed gullet. A gasping gurgle from the soldier's writhing mouth as he tumbled to the golden sand at his feet and wormed agonizingly in his deathbed. Grenner's Emerald green orbs glared lustfully at the wallowing soldier, struggling before his chestnut-swirled mount. His scowling voice reverberated over the dying form in a tone of mocking mirth. You city-bred dogs should learn not to antagonize your better. Reining his weary mount ahead, Grinner resumed his journey to the Nargolian city of Gorzum, hoping to discover wine, women, and adventure to boil the wild blood coursing through his savage veins. The trek to Gorzum was forced upon Grinner when the soldiers of Orin were leashed upon him by a faithless concubine he had wooed. His scandalous activities throughout the Sumerian city had unleashed throngs of havoc and uproar among its refined patricians, leading them to tack a heavy reward over his head. He had barely managed to escape through the back entrance of the inn he had been guzzling in, as a squad of soldiers pounced upon him. After spilling a spout of blood from the leader of the mercenaries as he dismembered one of the officer's arms, he retreated to his mount to make his way towards Gorzum, rumored to contain hordes of plunder and many young wenches for any man who has the backbone to wrest them away. Arriving after dusk in Gorzum, Grinner descended to a dismal alley, reining his horse before a beaten tavern. The red-haired giant strode into the dimly lit hostelry, reeking of foul odors and cheap wine. The air was heavy with choking fumes spewing from smoldering torches encased within the den's earthen-packed walls. Tables were clustered with groups of drunken thieves and cutthroats tossing dice or making love to willing prostitutes. Okay, that's it for me.
Eyeing a slender female crouched alone at a nearby bench, Griner advanced, wishing to wholesomely occupy his time. The flickering torches cast weird shafts of luminescence dancing over the half-naked harlot of his choice, her stringy orchid twines of hair swaying gracefully over the lithe, opaque nose as she raised a half-drained mug to her pale red lips. By the way, I'm very upset with you for making me start here. Glancing upward, the alluring complexion noted the stalwart giant as he rapidly approached. A faint glimmer sparked from the pair of deep blue ovals of the amorous female as she motioned toward Griner, enticing him to join her. The barbarian seated himself upon a stool at the wench's side, exposing his body, naked save for a loincloth brandishing a long steel broadsword, an iron spiraled battle helmet, and a thick leather sandals to her unobstructed view. "Thou hast need to occupy your time, barbarian?" questioned the female. "Only if something worth offering is within my reach," stated Griner, as his hands crept to embrace the tempting female, who welcomed them with open willingness. "From where do you come, barbarian, and by what are you called?" gasped the complying wench, as Griner smothered her lips with a blazing touch of his flaming mouth. The engrossed Titan ignored the queries of the inquisitive female, pulling her towards him and crushing her sagging yeah. Onward you go, friend.
The engrossed Titan ignored the queries of the inquisitive female, pulling her towards him and crushing her sagging nipples to his yearning chest. Without struggle, she gave in, winding her soft arms around the harshly bronzed hide of Griner, corded shoulder blades, as his calloused hands caressed her firm, protruding busts. "You make love well, wench," admitted Griner, as he reached for the vessel of potent wine his charge had been quaffing. A flying foot caught the mug Griner had taken hold of, sending its blood-red contents sloshing over a flickering crescent, leashing tongues of bright orange flame to the foot-trodden floor. Remove yourself, sirrah! The wench belongs to me, blabbered a drunken soldier, too far consumed by the influences of his viral brew to take note of the superior size of his adversary. Griner lithely bounded from the startled female, his face lit up to an ashen red ferocity, and eyes locked in a searing feral blaze toward the swaying soldier. To hell with you, braggart! Bellowed the angered accordion as he accordion.
To hell with you, braggart, bellowed the angered accordion as he hefted his finely honed broadsword. The staggering soldier clumsily reached towards the pommel of his dangling sword. But before his hands ever touched the oaken hilt, a silvered flash was slicing the heavy air. The thews of the savage's lashing right arm bulged from the glistening bronze hide as his blade bit deeply into the soldier's neck, loping off the confused head of his senseless tormentor. With a nauseating thud, the severed oval toppled to the floor, as the segregated torso of Grinner's bovine antagonist swayed, then collapsed in a pool of swirled crimson. In the confusion, the soldier's fellows confronted Grinner with an unsheathed cutlasses, directed toward the latter's scowling makeup. The slut should have picked his quarry more carefully, roared the victor in a mocking baritone growl as he wiped his dripping blade on the prostrate form and returned it to its scabbard. The fool should have shown more prudence. However, you shall rue your actions while rotting in the pits, stated one of the sprawled soldier's comrades. Grinner's hand began to remove his blade from its leather housing, but retarded the motion in the face of the blades waving before his face. Dismiss your hand from the hilt, barbarian, or you shall find a foot of steel sheathed in your gizzard. Grinner weighed his position, observing his plight, whereupon he took the soldier's advice as the only logical choice. To attempt to hack his way from his present predicament could only warrant certain death. He was of no mind to bring upon his own demise if an alternate path presented itself. The will to necessitate his life forced him to yield to the superior force in hopes of a moment of carelessness later upon the part of his captors in which he could effect a more plausible means of escape. You may steady your arms. I will go without a struggle. Your decision is a wise one, yet perhaps you would have been better off had you forced death. The soldier's mouth wrinkled to a sadistic grin of knowing mirth as he prodded his prisoner with his sword point. After an indiscriminate period of marching through slinking alleyways and dim moonlighted streets, the procession confronted a massive seraglio. The palace area was surrounded by an iron grating with a lush garden upon all sides. The group was admitted through the gilded gateway, and Grinner was led along a stone pathway bordered by plush vegetation lustfully enhanced by the...
The group was admitted through the gilded gateway, and Griner was led along a stone pathway bordered by plush vegetation, lustfully enhanced by the moon's shimmering rays. Upon reaching the palace, the group was granted entrance, and after several minutes of explanation, led through several winding corridors to a richly draped chamber. Confronting the group was a stocky man seated upon a golden throne. Tapestries of richly draped regal blue silk covered all walls of the chamber, while the steps leading to the throne were plated with sparkling white ivory. The man upon the throne had a naked wench seated at each of his arms, and a trusted advisor seated in back of him. At each corner of the chamber, a guard stood at attention, with upraised pikes supported in their hands, golden chainmail adorning their torsos, and barred helmets emitting scarlet plumes enshrouding their heads. The man rose from his throne to the dais surrounding it. His plush turquoise robe dangled loosely from his chunky frame. The soldiers surrounding Griner fell to their knees with heads bowed to the stone masonry of the floor in fearful dignity to their sovereign, liege. Explain the purpose of this intrusion upon my chateau. Your Serenity, resplendent and noble grandeur, we have brought this yokel before you, the soldier gestured toward Griner, for the redress of your all-knowing wisdom and judgment regarding his fate. Down on your knees, lout, and pay proper homage to your sovereign, commanded the pudgy noble of Griner. By the surly beard of Mrifk, Griner kneels to no man, scowled the massive barbarian. You dare to deal this blasphemous act to me? You're indeed brave, stranger, yet your valor smacks of foolishness. I find you to be the only fool, sitting upon your pompous throne, enhancing the rolling flabs of your belly in the midst of your elaborate luxury and... The soldier standing at Griner's side smote him heavily in the face with the flat of his sword, cutting short the harsh words and knocking his battered helmet to the masonry with an echoing clang. The paunchy noble's sagging round face flushed suddenly pale, then hastily lit up to a lustrous cherry-red radiance. His lips trembled with malicious rage, while emitting a muffled, sibilant gibberish. His sagging flabs rolled like a tub of upset jelly, then compressed as he sucked in his gut in an attempt to conceal his softness.
The prince regained his status, then spoke to the soldiers surrounding Griner, his face conforming to an ugly expression of sadistic humor. Take this uncouth heathen to the vault of misery, and be sure that his agonies are long and drawn out before death can release him. As you wish, sire. Your command shall be heeded immediately, answered the soldier on the right of Griner, as he stared into the barbarian's seemingly unaffected face. The advisor seated in the back of the noble slowly rose and advanced to the side of his master, motioning the wenches seated at his sides to remove themselves. He
Hello?
Yeah, we're down a man. I hope he's not reading too much. This is too good to miss.
He's probably just reading and hasn't even noticed that he dropped off yet.
Probably so.
Well, we'll know by the time he gets to the end of the page, or sooner.
I love Mr. Theis' use of of lustfully. Anytime it's supposed to be like, you know, an enchanting feeling, it's like lustful.
Yeah, he certainly has a way with words, especially sagging.
I'm like, hold on. Sagging nipples or firm bust? What? It's not a whole lot of crossover there. Just gonna say. Oh my goodness. So, viewers. I guess by now you can tell why this is such a quality piece and where the legend comes from. Truly. Oh,
Yep.
We lost the man himself.
Yep. The thing about it is, what's really hard about reading it, in addition to how ridiculous it is, normally when you're reading something, you can kind of tell if you like missed something. So it's like, oh, I must have missed a word there, or did I skip a line? Whereas all of this is just, you can't tell. You could probably have skipped a large section and have no idea that anything's off because it all feels like that.
And I think the saddest part of it is, reading this about comedies, this guy has a great a great bunch of world building gone into this, because like we've got accordions and Salamanchans or whatever. He's mentioned 2 or 3 different races, a couple of different cities. I mean, He's got himself a little world going here, and then he does this to it.
Yep.
Well, it's also I've actually been listening to audiobooks of Robert E. Howard's work, and it's pretty obvious who he's kind of cribbing from. Okay, so I got cut off a little bit ago. Apparently you two were still together.
Yes. You were about the advisor was just about to speak. He lowered his head and whispered to the noble, and then you were pretty much
Okay.
mute after that, and then you dropped off.
Okay. Geez. Okay. One moment. Okay. He lowered his head and whispered to the noble, "Eminence, the punishment you have decreed will cause much misery to this scum, yet it will last only a short time, then release him to a land beyond the sufferings of the human body. Why not mellow him in one of the subterranean vaults for a few days, then send him to life labor in one of your buried mines? To one such as he, a life spent in the confinement of the Stygian pits will be an infinitely more appropriate and lasting torture." The noble cupped his drooping double chin in the folds of his briming palm, meditating for a moment upon the rationality of the counselor's words, then raised his shaggy brown eyebrows and turned toward the advisor, eyes aglow. "As always, Agathon, you speak with great wisdom. Your words ring of great knowledge concerning the nature of one such as he, saith the king." The noble turned towards the prisoner with a noticeable shimmer reflecting in his frog-like eyes and his lips contorting to a greasy grin. "I have decided to void my previous decree. The prisoner shall be removed to one of the palace's underground vaults. There he shall stay until I have decided that he has sufficiently simmered, whereupon he is..."
Okay. I've decided to void my previous decree. The prisoner shall be removed to one of the palace's underground vaults. There he shall stay until I have decided that he is sufficiently simmered, whereupon he is to be allowed to spend the remainder of his days at labor in one of my mines. Upon hearing this, Grinner realized that his fate would be far less merciful than death to one such as he, who is used to roaming the countryside at will. A life of confinement would be more than his body and mind could stand up to. This type of life would be immeasurably worse than death. I shall never understand the ways if your twisted civilization. I simply defend my honor and am condemned to life confinement by a pig who sits on his royal ass wooing whores and knows nothing of the affairs of the land he imagines to rule. Lectures Grinner? Enough of this. Away with the slut before I loose my control. Seeing the peril of his position, Grinner searched for an opening. Crushing Prudence to the sward, he plowed into the soldier at his left arm, taking hold of his sword, and bounding to the dais supporting the prince before the startled guards could regain their composure. Agathon leaped Grinner and his sire, but found a sword blade meeting the length of his ribs before he could lose his weapon. The counselor slumped to his knees as Grinner slid his crimson blade from Agathon's ribcage. The fat prince stood undulating in insurmountable fear before the edge of the...
And we're back. Go ahead.
The counselor slumped to his knees as Grinner slid his crimson blade from Agathon's ribcage. The fat prince stood undulating in insurmountable fear before the edge of the fiery-maned comet, his flabs of jellied blubber pulsating to and fro in ripples of flowing terror. "Where is your wisdom and power now, your majesty?" growled Grinner. The prince went rigid as Grinner discerned him, glazing over his shoulder. He swiveled to note the cause of the noble's attention, raised his sword over his head, and prepared to leash a vicious downward cleft. but fell short as the haft of a steel-rimmed pike clashed against his unguarded skull. Then blackness and solitude, silence enshrouding, and ever peaceful reigned supreme. Before me, sirrah, before me as always, ha, 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 nobly cackled.
Okay, and let's see how far we got. We got 5 pages of about 20. So I regret that we will probably have to stop for now, especially considering all of the technical difficulties we've been experiencing. Hopefully, sometime in the not too distant future, we will be able to resume this and continue onwards with this epic adventure of Grigner. What other pronunciations do we have?
I will say I have to give Mr. Theis props for his, his ability, his, willingness to just, drop vowels out of the last syllables of names.
I mean, do you really need vowels?
Neither vowels nor bowels to be had in this story.
Apparently, I don't know. Maybe he's from Eastern Europe. I've seen some of that writing, and they seem to dispense with the vowels half the time.
Figure there'd be more.
Maybe vowels killed his parents, and ever since he just hasn't thought much of them.
No, he grew up poor, so they couldn't afford to buy any.
Okay, so I will have to try to edit together the pieces of this and see what we can come up with. And hopefully we can continue this in the future. I will post what we have so far. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen, and we will be closing out for today.
Have a good one.
Good.